You are welcome once again to the Bereans TV channel. We started a series sometimes ago titled The New Testament Church. We have done the first episode and want to continue with that series. We want to do the second episode of that series. In the first episode, we were looking at why is the emphasis on the New Testament. We said the New Testament Church. Because some people, they don't really understand when we say New Testament Church. People always want to just say church. Why adding the New Testament to it again? And we tried to explain in the first episode why the New Testament is important, because the church, the word church, was mentioned based on, or the church was founded, established on the New Testament, not on the Old Testament, Old Covenant. And so, if the church was established, founded on the New Testament, then it must be practiced based on the New Testament principles. It must be operated by the New Testament principle. And that is why the church and the New Testament principles or doctrines go together. The church and the Old Testament, they don't go together. And so we have now explained, we have differentiated between the Old and the New Testament, and we were able to see where the Old Testament started and where it ended, and where the New Testament started and when it is going to end. And we were able to see that the church is based on the New Testament church, was founded on the New Testament church, and must be operated on the New Testament principles and doctrines. And so today, we want to continue from that, we want to continue from where we stopped. We want to be looking at what the church is not. Sometimes it is good to know what something is not before we know what that thing is. It is sometimes good to know what something is not before we know what it is. And sometimes it is good to start a definition of something from what that thing is not before we now go into the real definition of it. And so the word church, ecclesia in Greek, we want to look at what it is not. And then later we will now look at what it is. And so the first thing that the church is not is the church is not a building. This is something serious, and this is one key knowledge that every Christian should have or should know. This is something that every Christian should know, that the church, the ecclesia, is not a building built with blocks and cement or stone and cement. Let me first read from Acts of the Apostles chapter 7. I want to read verse 47 and 48. Acts of the Apostles chapter 7. I want to read verse 47 and 48. It was Stephen that was talking here when he was kind of arrested, in quotes now, and when he was giving the historical line of Jesus Christ. He was explaining some important, vital things to his captors. And when it got to verse 47, Stephen said, "But Solomon built him a house," referring to the temple of Solomon, the temple Solomon built. And Stephen was referring to that. But don't forget that temple is a physical or a static form of tabernacle. Tabernacle was what God commanded Moses to build, and that is movable because the children of Israel were still in transit from Egypt to Canaan. when God told Moses to build tabernacle, the children of Israel to build tabernacle. And so tabernacle is like our modern day canopy that you can set up, dismantle, and carry again to establish, to set up again. And so that was tabernacle. It's movable from one point to the other. They set it up. When they were moving again, they dismantle it and then they move again. But the permanent type or version of it was the temple that Solomon built. And so both the tabernacle and temple, they serve the same purpose. And that was under the old covenant. If you remember, the old covenant is the covenant God gave the children of Israel. The covenant God made with the children of Israel. And he gave them the law. And he gave them some things that they should do and should not do. And so Stephen said, but Solomon built him a house, that is the temple. Then in verse 48, it now says, however, you know the meaning of however, but the Most High does not dwell in temples made with human hands. With human hands, as the prophet says, heaven is my throne, and earth is my footstool. What house will you build for me, saith the Lord? Or what is the place of my rest? Now, Stephen said this, that however, the Most High does not dwell in a building or in a house built with human hands. And this must register so well with us. And then in Hebrews chapter 8, let me read Hebrews chapter 8 and 9. Hebrews chapter 8 verse 1 and 2 says something that the old temple or the tabernacle that God commanded Moses to build, the Israelites to build, was just a symbol of the heavenly tabernacle, of the spiritual tabernacle. And that is what Hebrew is saying. In Hebrews chapter 8 verse 1 and 2, it says, moreover, brethren, we make known to you the grace of God bestowed on the churches of Macedonia. Sorry, I'm reading 2 Corinthians. Hebrews chapter 8 verse 1 and 2. Hebrews chapter 8 verse 1 and 2. It says, now this is the main point of the things we are saying. We have such a high priest who is seated at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens. Verse 2, a minister of the sanctuary and the true tabernacle which the Lord erected and not man. True tabernacle which the Lord erected and not man. Now, for you to understand this clearly, let's go to Hebrews chapter 11, chapter 9, verse 11. Hebrews 9:11 now says, but Christ came as high priest of the good things to come, with the greater and more perfect tabernacle, not made with hands, that is, not of this creation. It says Jesus came with the greater and more perfect tabernacle, not made with hands, that is, not of this creation. Now you can see that the tabernacle in the Old Testament is symbolic, is typifying a spiritual thing, spiritual tabernacle that is not made with human hands. And that is talking about Jesus and the church. Jesus and the church. So the church is not a building. But the problem I have with this is many believers or many Christians, they claim that they know that the church is not a building. But you now see the way they adore building, you see the way they spend on building, which they claim that they know it is not the church. And then you begin to question their knowledge. Sometimes we claim to know something, but our practices are contradicting our knowledge. What we claim we know, our practices are contradicting it. When you see someone who said he knows that the church is not a building, and you now see that same person, maybe a preacher of the gospel, spending millions and billions of naira on the building that he said is not the church, and you now see someone in that same church who cannot afford to pay the school fees of his children, but he will prefer to spend millions on the building and not ready to help a brother or a sister in need. And then you ask them, but you say you know that the building is not the church. are the people at the church. Now, this is the church that is having problem, that is having a challenge, financial challenge that you want to attend to, but you prefer to spend that money on the building and not on a brethren that is having a challenge. Then you discover that knowledge is faulty. It's not true knowledge. We don't really know that the building is not the church. The building is just a place where brethren gather to fellowship. And that could be anywhere. You could be in a living room. You could be under a shed. You could be a classroom in a school. You could be anywhere. And it could be a building that brethren contribute money to build because that's what is convenient for them, or that's what will help them. But that is where it could be like, but it is not that building that is the church. We should have that. That knowledge should really sink into us. And then that will, if we have that knowledge, then we will see our attitude towards building and our attitude towards the reality. And that is the brethren, the people that we know that it is the church. Number 2, the church is not an extension of Judaism. You see, when you enter many denominations today, there is nothing, you will not see anything different from Judaism. Starting from the building, and then inside the building, you see the altar. They built a special place, and they are copying that, a form of pattern of the Old Testament. The holy place, the holy of holy, and then the congregational place, the congregation place. And so they still build the building after that pattern. So, but they can't, there is no way they can fashion out holy of holy. But they still fashion out the holy place, the altar. So you see the altar, and then you see the place for the congregation. So there is a place inside the building that is exalted. They make the place to be a bit exalted, and then the congregational place will go down, and then that place is raised. And then they demarcate that place, and they say it is holy, it is the altar. And then you begin to ask again, but you said the building, the church is not building. Then why are you now again talking about the altar and the congregation, the outer space, and you are still adoring this place, and you are still deifying this place that it is holy and it is altar. That is part of Judaism. Not only that, when you still enter again, apart from the altar and the choir dress, the whole thing pattern after the Old Testament, you now still see again that the practices, most of the messages are Old Testament based. They are Moses. Don't do this, don't do that, don't wear this, don't say this, don't act like this, don't go this way, don't go. You see do's and don'ts which are copied from the Old Testament. That is number 2. But ecclesia, the church, there is liberty of the Spirit. There is the Spirit guiding the people of God. Nobody is giving anybody rules and regulations. But we will go into that later, what the church really is. And then we will explain how brethren should live, and not with rules and regulations, not with laws, not with do's and don'ts. We will see that later. That is number 2. The church is not an extension of Judaism. It is not Judaism. It is not an extension of Judaism. Another thing you see is preachers under the New Testament, they call themselves Levites. They say they are spiritual Levites. And that is an extension of Judaism. We are not Levites. We are Gentiles. We are not Levites. And even under the New Testament, the Old Testament is God. Anyone that, even an Israelite that comes to Christ, is neither a Levite nor an Israelite. It's not a new person in Christ Jesus. Is an ecclesia, is a church, is one of the brethren, one of the members of the body of Christ. So there is no Levite, there is nothing like that in the New Testament, in the church. So that is not an extension of Judaism. Number 3, the church is not an organization, but an organism. But what do we see today? Go to most of our denominations. What you see is an organizational structure. You wouldn't see anything different. Organizational structure from the GO, General Overseer, is more or less equivalent to MD, CEO, Chief Executive Officer of an organization, because he operates as a CEO, like CEO. He operates like MD, CEO. What you see, and then you see all the hierarchical arrangement, hierarchical order. You see the GO, then the assistant or deputy GO, then you see the deputy of that one, then you see provincial this, regional pastor, national GO, national overseer, regional overseer, state overseer, district overseer, church this, and then you come down, then you now have the church, the pastor over a particular small church. So you see the cadre and then the hierarchy, and then like that. Then it's not different from a corporation, an organization. Not only that, you see all kinds of practices that we only found in an organization. That is what you see in what we call the church. The church is not an organization, but an organism. You will see, we explain this better when we get to what the church is. The church is not an organization, but an organism. And brethren, what we see today, we can easily conclude that most of what we call church today, or what we call church today, especially in Africa and Nigeria, they are not really churches. They are organizations. They are Judaism. They are just mere human practices. Number 4, the church is not an association. You know, all these associations that we have different kinds of associations, especially in Nigeria. Take for instance, in Ibadan here, that is, I'm talking from Nigeria, in Ibadan here, we have Ibadan Society Indigene Association. You have Good Women Association. You have Omar Joroso Club. You have this so club, this so association. You have in our campuses, you have Osun Indigene Student Association. You have Ibadan Indigene Student Association amongst them. So you have different kinds of associations. And so the church is not an association, but we operate as an association. Most of the time, when you look at an association, you look at the president of the association, the vice president, and all the other executive officers, and then the members of the association, you see the way they operate. And when you come again into what we call the church, you see that the operation in the church is not really different from what the association is practicing. And so it's more or less like an association that we practice. And then even inside what we call the church, we still now have different associations. We even have tribal associations in the church. The Yoruba clique, the Hausa clique, the Igbo clique. Even in the denomination, you see how those clique kind of. And then you begin to wonder, is this an association or an ecclesia? And you will not even be able to see the difference between the association in the word and what we call ecclesia. So the church is not an association. And then we will see what the church is when we are going through what the church really is. And so, in the next episode, we will be looking at what the church really is. I hope you will watch out and you will stay tuned. Thank you, and God bless you.